Howdy y'all, happy Ides of March. Welcome back. Today we're going to be looking at Helsingborg, Sweden. We're going to be looking through old world photographs of this area, as well as maps, artistic depictions, and this is currently the 9th largest city in Sweden. However, we're going to be focusing on the more ancient history. Helsingborg has a long-standing history, which places it at the forefront of both Swedish and Danish cultures, with the massive tower-like structure you see pictured here, known as Karnan, being the main focus of today's video. Karnan is literally translated as the core, and when you see this towering structure, even in artistic renditions of the city of Helsingborg from over 600 years ago, it certainly makes us question the origins of what we see in front of us. Karnan and the surrounding structure was also part of a larger star fort, which made up Helsingborg.
Now, another interesting theory I want to share with you before we dive deeper into this history is, as we look at the artistic depictions of the tower Karnan from the 1314 and 1500s, the tower itself resembles an ancient tree stump. This becomes very interesting when we consider the tree of life and other aspects of the old world, but more importantly, when we consider the current official narrative of the tower Karnan, we're told the most accurate way to date the tower is to date the trees found nearby. And we will cover all that history and more in today's video.
According to the current narrative, and as always, take this with a grain of salt, we are told that Helsingborg is considered one of the oldest and most important cities in what is today Sweden. However, due to its location, Helsingborg actually has a history that ties back directly to the ancient Danish crown. We're told the tower at Karnan, for example, can be attributed to the Danes. However, the true origin of the tower and its infrastructure is still contested today. Fascinating that we have this tower, Karnan itself, said to be the last remnant of a much larger fortress which encircled the entire city of Helsingborg. And yet, at the same time, the core of this city has very little in early history that is written about it. We do not know exactly when Karnan and the surrounding star fort was constructed. We're told it was once just a mere sliver to a much larger superstructure, a massive series of forts which encapsulated all of Helsingborg, possibly even connecting to Kronborg across the Orson Strait. Helsingborg is not a small city by any means,
So let us now browse quickly through some pre-1920 photographs of Helsingborg so you can get an idea of what the rest of the city looks like. Notice all the archwork, all the antiquitech, and all of the bricks. Another thing that you'll notice as we browse through these photographs of Helsingborg is how wide these streets are in the old world. It's as if they left room for growth, or if these streets, just like the buildings, with these very large entrances and the stories on the buildings being 15, 20 feet, etc., the things that we see in many old world cities are apparent here in Helsingborg as well. Now, that doesn't necessarily make us question the narrative, but as we look into the true history of this area and we find that it all was a series of fortresses, it becomes even more apparent that this architecture and the infrastructure below it has a history that needs to be focused on in more depth. So now we're going to look at roughly 75 photographs of old world Helsingborg just to get an idea of the intricacies of this city before, at the end of this video, focusing on the oldest known images, blueprints, and photographs from before 1900 of the Tower Karnan. Enjoy.
The Tower Karnan is absolutely immense, towering over the rest of the city, excuse my pun. Even nowadays, it seems to be the centerpiece of the city, with the rest of Helsingborg flowing outward from Karnan's steep and impeding walls. To imagine the Tower Karnan was only a small piece to a much larger structure is nearly impossible for us to picture. Danish legend will tell us that the ancient fortress at Helsingborg, with Karnan at its core, was built by the mythical king Howdy, a ferocious leader who, amongst other works, features predominantly in Beowulf as the leader of the Beards. Now, the Beards are a lost group of people originally featured predominantly in early Norse texts, but the course of their history and even their true origin has never been recorded with full accuracy or with historians agreeing upon it. Most historians assume that the Beards are of Saxon Germanic ancestry. So, according to this Danish tradition, the fortress at Helsingborg, which for centuries was the most important fortress for Danish trade, was actually constructed by the mythical king Howdy. All of Helsingborg, as we dive into these photographs, you will begin to see was nearly completely constructed using red brick. How truly ancient is the brickwork which makes up the core at Karnan? Well, when it comes to the scientific method of dating this superstructure, we've apparently reached our scientific limits. We're told the most accurate way to date Karnan, and indeed to date the rest of the ancient fortress at Helsingborg, is to use dendrochronology, or to count the rings on the nearby trees. For a city that's apparently so important and so structurally sound, at least as far as Karnan and the ancient star fort goes, for the architecture to exceed much of the other architecture built at a similar time in Denmark and what became Sweden, it's difficult to understand how this city, so important, could lack a thoroughly written history regarding its largest structure. Karnan is dated to roughly 1310 due to the rings in the trees found directly nearby. Could the trees that were surrounding the Tower Karnan and used to date it actually have been placed there much later? Absolutely. Does placing Karnan's construction in the 1310s, as the current narrative does, give the credit for this construction to Eric VI of Denmark, alas, placing a face on a seemingly bewildering moment in the ancient world? Yes, it does this as well. That is what the current narrative usually does. As we continue into it, we're told that Eric VI and the Danes then controlled both sides of the strait, effectively controlling Scania on one side and Zealand on the other. As we look into the ancient depictions and even the early photographs of Karnan, I can't help but imagine just how massive the rest of the fort surrounding this tower would have been. And furthermore, by the shape and the design, the symmetry and the uniqueness which we see, I can't help but wonder if the Helsingborg fortress served as more than just a defensive structure, if it was not more advanced, possibly serving an ulterior purpose, with the Tower Karnan literally working as the core of the Helsingborg machine. The Helsingborg fortress and the city of Helsingborg served as home for the sound dues, essentially taxes levied on all boats entering the Danish waters. This was aimed at limiting the power and wealth of certain individuals in the Hanseatic League while firmly gaining a vast new income for the growing Danish crown. We're told the Tower Karnan and the entire Danish fortress at Helsingborg were surrendered to the Swedish with the Treaty of Roskilde in 1658. We're told the town of Helsingborg, with the ancient walls, the Tower Karnan, the infrastructure built over centuries, and the Norse population, which called this vast and epic community home, actually numbered at 1,000 people or less in 1658. The territory of Helsingborg quickly fell victim to the new narrative being written by the Swedish. Charles XI of Sweden, for example, ordered the entire Helsingborg fortress destroyed for building materials in the year 1679, just 21 years after gaining power and promising the locals of Helsingborg that there would be no changes. The only structure within the larger Helsingborg fortress that Charles XI of Sweden
allowed to remain standing was the tower, Karnan. It seems what was once a bustling community in Helsingborg, a trade community key to keeping the Hanseatic League in check, while also growing the Danish Empire, what stood as one of the largest and most strategic star forts in Denmark, was reduced over time. First, it appears the population was reduced. Then, it appears that trade to the area was systematically reduced. Then, it appears the history itself was reduced or rewritten, before finally, the actual physical structures which made up and lined the city of Helsingborg were reduced until all that remained was the core, the Karnan. Nowadays, Helsingborg realizes a much more modest history, as it has really for the last few centuries while under Swedish rule. No longer do we see the spoils of war, of Denmark, or the epic nature of the sprawling fortress and star fort which once encompassed this entire landscape. And what we see in the oldest and rarest photographs creates a dichotomy. There are so many differences when we look at the Old World city. At its core, it remains one of the most unique and powerful cities in all of Europe. That is, at its core, we have the tower, the ancient and mysterious Karnan.